Greetings, friends, greetings. How are you all doing? Nico here with the Crossroads podcast. It has been a while, hasn't it? About a month and a half since the last episode, which is the longest hiatus I've had so far from the podcast. And what have I been doing? I've been writing a lot, as I said I would in the last couple of episodes before the break. So I've been working on this novel. There's 2 chapters out actually on my Substack, which you can find linked in the description. So I highly encourage you to give those a read and maybe give me some feedback. What I'm thinking of doing for this novel, because I realized it kind of dawned on me that releasing a novel this way is a bit of a pain for the writer, because a great advantage that writers have when they're writing a book is that they know, of course, how it's going to end. So that allows you to kind of go back and forth and change things accordingly, whether it's tiny detail or major plot points. Before you publish a book, you have the advantage that you can go back and forth and change things, and you change something in one chapter, and of course you're going to have to change it in the 5th chapter as well, if that you want to keep that consistency going and you don't want to confuse readers either with the plot or with other details. So basically I realized that releasing something chapter by chapter is not a great idea if I want to change something and go back and change it, or something like that. So for the readers, it's not going to be great if they're giving this to read and then they realize that I've went back and changed something because I realized, oh, this doesn't really work. So basically what I've decided to do is to release another chapter, which will be uploaded on my Substack probably this week, maybe next week, and to just end it there, basically the sort of chapter by chapter publishing, and just start working on it as a whole novel, and then maybe publish it slowly once it's completed, but basically have it all finished and then think about publishing it, because I've realized that this is really not the best way to do it for this kind of thing. So but I've been working on that a lot. I have a whole plot pretty much figured out, which I'm very excited about. And again, you can find the first couple of chapters on my Substack, and they will stay there. And they're free to read. So again, highly encourage you to do that and to give me feedback and just tell me what you think. So I've been busy with that over the past sort of month and a half. I've been doing some works around the house. I had a massive leak in my toilet, which needed some fixing. So that's taking quite a bit of my time. But we're back, and we're back with another episode of the Crossroads podcast. And today I have something that I think you will really enjoy, because I'm not going to be talking to the mic for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or however long the episodes usually are. But I actually have a guest, and that guest is someone who I've mentioned a few times in the podcast in the past, and that guest is my very dear and lovely girlfriend, Ilyana. So I thought I would bring her on the show and just have a little discussion about how the past couple of years, or like 20 months, or however long it's been, have been for us, our shift in sort of beliefs over 2020 and early 2021, when we had a big sort of argument about what was happening, and just talk through our experience as a couple during lockdown and the early part of the so-called pandemic, and what's happening now with the jab and all of this. So I thought it would be a good sort of opportunity to just bring her on and have a very open and relaxed discussion about us, about the world, about what's happening around us with our families, our friends. And because I think it's also a very important time to have these kinds of discussions. So I hope you enjoy. And without further ado, here is our conversation.
Take a puff of cigarette first.
Just smoke, or however you feel.
It's a cool meeting.
It's a cool meeting, yes.
Okay.
So how are you today?
Good. I'm a little nervous, but good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought we would, well, you already know the reason, but of course we have to tell people while we're doing
Yeah.
this. Well, I've mentioned you a few times in the podcast, just in terms of the discussions we have. And I think we've been, even before the pandemic, we've been bouncing ideas of each other on all sorts of topics pretty much all the time. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to just bring you in and actually have a discussion on camera about what's happening in the world, about our beliefs and how they change in these almost 20 months or more than 20 months. So to do that, I think it would be good to start with who you are. Of course, you're my girlfriend, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So my name is Ilyana. I am 26 years old. I am a civil servant at the moment, and I am half Kenyan and half Scottish. So I was born in the UK and moved to Kenya or to East Africa when I was a little baby, and lived there for 13 years. And it's technically in my head still my home, but I live in Scotland now. Um, Came to Scotland for university in 2013 and did my undergraduate in philosophy, as I was not too sure what I wanted to do or get out of a university education. So I was like, I'll just get everything.
You want to do English, no? Originally.
Yeah,
Or
I originally applied for English with philosophy, and when grades day came, I didn't get the grades for English. So after a very tearful phone call with the university, um, they said you can come and do philosophy. So I said all right, and they gave me the option to transfer to English when I arrived,
Mhm.
or to take some English modules and maybe incorporate them into my degree. But I think I saw there was Chaucer on the modules, and I didn't want to do it, so I didn't take any English modules. But yeah, did my undergrad in philosophy, and then finished that. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, so I did a master's in Africa and international development in the University of Edinburgh, and that's, I guess, kind of me in a nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah. And we met in 2016. And
Mm-hmm.
while you were in university in St. Andrews when we met.
Yes.
And then, because you started earlier than me, our undergrad, basically you finished, then I finished, but you came to Edinburgh and during my last year of undergrad to do your master's. So that's kind of how the whole thing worked. And we moved in together back in 2018, I think it was. And
Mm-hmm.
we've been living together ever since, which I guess is when we finally get into, well, finally, we just started, but we get into the subject, sort of hot topic subject matter, which is the pandemic and what's happening in the world. And we actually have, I mean, I guess it's not that interesting, but I guess the beginning was especially interesting in terms of our experience, because when everything was kind of kicking off in February last year, we were in Switzerland with my family. And we're actually at a huge party, like literally at the end of February, when the news was really getting hot about COVID arriving in Europe and stuff. And we're at this huge party, and we're all kind of like, oh, what's going to happen? Are we going to get sick? And we were the only people coming back from Geneva wearing masks, I remember, at the airport. And this must have been like the 25th, I think, of February. And so it's interesting how things have changed ever since. But do you want to maybe tell people about like the really first month, like lockdown, the toilet rush, like just how weird it was?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, going back to, I suppose, the sort of beginning, the way I conceptualize it now was I was on holiday in Kenya first, and
Mm.
very mild, low rumblings of this new flu
And this was like
circulating.
December 2019, basically. Yeah.
December
Yeah.
2019, exactly, yeah. And funnily enough, like the rumblings were so low, they weren't really on my radar. And I had went to a wedding, and we all came back sick, horribly ill from that wedding. Um, didn't think too much of it, thought it was just a bad bug that went around the wedding. And then come February, we went to Megève for my birthday. Yeah, you mentioned being in the airport, and we were the only ones wearing masks.
Yeah.
And we were getting pretty dirty looks for
Yeah.
wearing masks in the airport. Because at that point, that's when I think it was still in China, or it was just sort of leaving China. I think
No,
actually,
no,
no,
it had left.
it had left China at that point, because we were hearing rumblings of ski villages near where we were staying that had outbreaks,
Yeah.
with children and stuff. So, but yeah, at that point they were telling us no masks, you don't need a mask, no mask wearing. People who wear
Yeah.
masks are just panicking. And your cousin, he's quite health centric, he's health conscious, so he gave us a pair of
Yeah, because he
masks.
had a double lung transplant back in 2016, actually. So he's very, as he should be, worried about his health and everything. So he gave us masks.
Yeah, he had a
Yeah.
good stock of masks. So we were just like, "Oh, why not? Let's be careful." I was
Yeah.
kind of enjoying it. I was like, "Ooh, fashion. What look can I create out of this?" Um, but yeah, we got really dirty looks in the airport. And I remember sitting down at my plane chair and wiping down my stow table, my tray table.
So crazy to think, yeah.
The guy next to me saw us wearing masks and he was like, "Oh, do you think, do you think I should wear one too?" And I was just kind of like, "Oh, it doesn't hurt, you know."
Yeah.
And he sort of sheepishly pulled his out and put it on as well. It was just, oh, you never know. I've got mine, but I didn't think it was necessary. So that was back in February where we were just kind of like, oh, cautious.
Yeah.
So that
And the
was
news
February.
like really was buzzing everywhere. It's the kind of thing that it was really hard, honestly, to see what was happening. You're just bombarded with news. You kind of, maybe you're skeptical a bit. I started following a couple of commentators like Chris Martenson from Peak Prosperity on YouTube, who had been commenting on the early outbreaks in China and stuff. And I remember having arguments with an Italian friend of mine who studies medicine, and he was like, "No, this is just a big panic," and I was like, "No, this seems like it's actually a real thing that's happening. Like, we might get into a pandemic." And so this was again the very early stages, and
Yeah.
of course we had the toilet rush, but we don't really need to get into the details of all of that. It was just a weird time seeing empty streets, completely new sort of situation everyone was thrown into. But what I want to get in, sorry, yeah, tell me.
I was gonna say when that actually happened for us, I mean, our kind of rush was, I remember it was our flatmates,
Mhm.
Linnea, our
Yeah,
friend's
yeah,
birthday,
yeah,
and Trump had just announced a travel ban from people going into the States,
yeah.
right? So it kind of created this mad rush for all the Americans to go home before they were locked out of their country. And I think that's when it clicked for us that, oh shit, something's going
Something's
down.
happening. Yeah, yeah.
And it was just before lockdown in the UK happened as well. And yeah, it was crazy because she had to leave her cat with us, poor thing,
Mhm.
and just go because she couldn't get the cat's travel arrangements done in time. And that's, I think, when it hit that shit, this is actually kind of serious. People are going to
Yeah.
be locked in their countries. But yeah, sorry, your next
No,
question.
no. It's no, I was saying, it was obviously a crazy time, but we don't need to get into the whole detail week by week kind of thing. What's more interesting, I think, is how things changed throughout last year. And for example, things seemed like they were opening up in May, mid-May, June. Sun was coming out here in Scotland. We went to have an amazing picnic with friends, and we really thought like, okay, we're getting out of this. And things, for me at least, started to click after normality didn't come back after that, and which was actually the time that the infamous book COVID-19: The Great Reset was also released, and that's really, for me at least, was my an early, let's say, turning point. Because even at that time, I wasn't completely like, oh, okay, this is actually not what it looks like. But I did start thinking much more carefully, like, what is actually happening? This book is written by a pretty important person in a pretty important institution, the World Economic Forum, and he's making it seem like COVID is not that big of a deal, but it represents some sort of opportunity for the world. And it's like, okay, that's a bit strange. So that, at least for me, was the turning point, but not for you. So how
Yeah.
would you say your beliefs sort of changed throughout mostly 2020, getting towards the end of 2020? I traveled back home to Zim, you know.
Yeah. So it's hard to pinpoint because that book, I guess that time is also when we started to hear about misinformation and
Mm.
disinformation. And I remember there was the pandemic documentary. I think that was the first big piece of air quotes.
So-called misinformation, yeah.
Yeah, I
Was it
can't.
already last year? Yeah, probably
Yeah, no, I
around some
didn't. I
point.
don't think I actually watched it because of just the sort of reaction it got, where it's like, "Don't watch this. It's propaganda. It's misinformation. It's all lies." And it's like, okay, don't involve myself with it. Um, I think it's hard to try and identify when we sort of, I don't know, went at a crossroads and our views started to diverge.
I think it was
Um,
late last year, early this year, like basically December, January. So basically, just to make quick, I went back home to Zimbabwe where my family lives in December of last year for a couple of weeks. And my dad is really into all of this stuff. Like he and his brother talk almost every day, and they're Italian. So, with what's happening in Italy, especially, it's especially relevant for us. But I talked with my dad when I was back home, and he was getting some feelings I think were strange, some weird stuff happening, some things that did not make sense with cases and the way they were counted, and deaths and the way they were counted from COVID. So that's, I think, for us, me then coming back home to Scotland, talking with you, discussing things, starting to raise questions about what's happening. I think that's when really things started. But the breaking point, of course, was our argument on the bus. Do you want to tell the story, or?
See, I barely remember it. I feel like I've blocked it out. But okay, I'll try to tell what I think I remember. I think it was when mask wearing in enclosed public spaces became mandatory or government
Yeah, it
guidance or
was
something.
brought back, I think. I'm forgetting exactly the whole sequence of things,
Yes,
but yeah, it was pretty frowned upon
blur,
not to have a mask at that time. Yeah.
exactly. So this was before, I guess, the mask debate had really heated up. But yeah, so after, I guess, being told not to wear masks, we were told to wear masks, and I put my mask on. And I think, I can't remember if it's you were wearing your mask under your nose or you just refused to wear it altogether.
No, it was irritating my nose. We were on the bus, and I just kept it basically under my nose because, like, I kept scratching my nose when it was on it. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna keep it under. And then,
That peeved me off because I admit there were a couple of things there. I was a bit embarrassed, right? Because of the social kind of media um piling on people who didn't wear their masks properly. You know what I mean? The people who would wear a mask and have it under their nose and still be putting virus into the
yeah,
air. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But those were my thoughts at the time. So I was like, why is he being like this? This is a smart boy. He's not using his brain. He knows these are the rules and he's openly flaunting them. And yeah, that got us into a bit of an argument because you were like, my nose is itchy. And I was like, grow up. And
yeah.
I also don't like arguing in public. So
No, yeah,
once
you hate it.
I hate it so much. I really do. So once it starts becoming like that, I'd rather grit my teeth and smile and pretend that we're a happy couple or just walk away from you. But I'm not going to have a bicker in
You're not
public.
gonna make a
So
scene, basically. That's the main thing. Yeah.
exactly,
So it
yeah, yeah.
started becoming a bit of a scene with us arguing, and I don't remember exactly what happened, but basically, we got off the bus, or we reached our destination more or less. But then in the street, we kept arguing, and you
I just
basically
walked away.
walked away. She walked off, calling me a conspiracy theorist. I remember that quite
Yeah,
accurately. And no,
yeah.
the important part there was that, for me at least, what I still remember quite, not vividly, but it's still impressed in my mind. Like, so you said something which was, if we just comply, or if we just do it, if we just do this, we're gonna get out of it or something. And I'm pretty sure I heard the word government in that sentence as well. So something like, if we just comply with, if we do what the government says, we're gonna end up out of the situation. Which,
I mean, I can't
thinking,
imagine myself saying if we just comply, but yeah,
yeah,
if we get on with
yeah,
it.
maybe not, maybe it wasn't, if we just comply, but it was definitely something like, if we do just, what the experts are telling us, we'll get out of the situation.
Yeah.
And thinking of that, and also thinking, well, what you just mentioned earlier, it's interesting, like the pressure you felt from, like, the media, I guess, shunning people who don't wear masks, or don't wear that, or don't wear them properly. Like, just this feeling of being associated with that kind of person is very powerful, I think,
Yeah.
in a way. And it's really shows, I think, how a lot of everything has played out. It thrives on, like, social, the sort of in group, out group, not being one, no, not wanting to associate with anti-vaxxers, who, or whatever kind of group is in question, which I think has played a big role in just
Yeah.
how it's affected society, this whole thing.
Yeah, I think the messaging has brought about a lot of self-regulation, which has been really interesting.
Yeah,
We've heard how, what is it, Spivey? I can't remember, Sage. There's the
the
government
paper, or the
group. It's the government advisory group. I can Google
Sage.
it. No, it's called SPIB.
Yeah, I remember that. I forget what it stands for, but yeah, something spy B something.
Scientific Pandemic Insights Group, something like that. And it focused on behavior.
Yeah, yeah.
And one of the things they came out, I'm pretty sure it was them, so you can correct me after if I'm wrong when you're editing this. But they had admitted to using, sort of extreme psychological behavioral techniques in
Yeah.
order to elicit the kind of behavior that they wanted. And I think it worked. I was mad at you. It was to the point that we were really like, your podcast is aptly named. We were at a crossroads, and
Yeah.
um it felt like our views were just diverging and diverging and diverging, and there was no way to bring them back. But they did sort of come back full circle.
Yeah.
So
Almost I was not okay. I wouldn't say miraculously, but it was honestly very tense at one moment. Like it was like, how are we gonna get back exactly? Because I believe a completely different picture right now. And it was still January also. So imagine how far we've kind of come after. But the breaking point where, like, now without getting into too much detail, because I'm also forgetting all the details, but basically I was like, okay. And at that time, because I like to listen to podcasts as well, like when I'm cooking, I put something in the background. And you said something around that time also. And it was like, please, babe, if you're going to listen to like conspiracy podcasts or things that are talking, even not conspiracy necessarily, but things that are talking about what's happening, because I think it also stresses you sometimes to just hear about all the time what's happening in the world. But if you're going to do that, you told me just maybe wear earphones. And I started doing that for a bit. But of course, we still had this massive underlying disagreement about what's happening. So we needed to resolve that somehow. So I was basically like, okay, babe, can I just show you a 30-minute interview, which was Rainer Fuelmick interviewing
Astrid.
Astrid Zuckerberger, who's I assume now ex WHO. She worked in public health and for WHO and as a contractor as well. And I'm forgetting her whole career, but basically it was this interview by lawyers, by Rainer Fuelmick team, interviewing her for half an hour. And I was like, okay, this is my last attempt at making my girlfriend kind of see, not understand everything, because we don't understand everything now even, but to just let her see, help her see that there's something happening that it's like we're not being told, basically. And I think that finally made you like ask questions again. It didn't make you see everything, and what does that even mean, but it made you at least put you in that position that you can like, okay, the media is not telling me this. Why is this person who seems reputable, seems like she has a good CV, like she's not some conspiracy nut, she's saying these things that do not match what we're seeing in the news? So I think that was really the starting point of at least your sort of journey into this whole world, which has been interesting. But do you want to maybe talk a bit about that and how that made you feel, and like just,
Yeah. Um, so I think I'm trying to pick out what it was about the Stuckelberger interview that really got me to change my approach to the pandemic and what was going on. And yeah, you're right. I think one big thing is credentials, which is an interesting thing because it has become almost a battle of the experts
yeah,
this last 19, 20 months, however long it's been now. Um, and yeah, I found it really interesting to see, as you say, someone who is part of one of the is part of one of the institutions that has been leading on the guidance and the narrative of this whole pandemic, and coming out and contradicting it outright, and not even contradicting it, but also, I suppose, accusing them
I'm making
of doing,
serious claims. Yeah,
yeah, exactly, about what was actually going on. So a big thing was, what does this person have to lose, or what do they have to gain by it? I think another interesting thing was the fact it was coming from a woman.
mm.
Um, that really changed my approach to it. So I don't know if that is sexist or not, but or if there's some bias there.
There probably is
Um,
some bias, but the fact that you can't point to the reason, like, it probably feels like a pretty intuitive feeling. That's like, if that's how you feel, like, who am I to question it?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really, I'm sure I could explain it if I dug into it, but the fact it was coming from a woman saying this, and I think it was also the fact that you were so not convinced, but how do I put it? It was such a strong crossroads. I was like, if this is something we're really arguing over, you know what I mean? It's not just a passing interest
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something that's piqued your interest for you. So I need to actually listen to what you're saying. Oh, excuse me.
I'll
Excuse
edit it
me.
out.
But yeah, I actually need to listen to what you're saying and hear you and not just be like, oh, he's saying this, but other people are saying that. And these are the words he's saying. And these are the words that the media are saying are wrong or whatever, are dangerous. So yeah, that really changed my approach to it. And I guess got me digging for more information. I started asking you for information. I started, you would listen to your podcast without your earphones on, and I would tune into what you were listening in and ask you to explain it or go back, or started joining, following more accounts that were talking about this and
Yeah.
seeing, okay,
And for me, sorry, just want to say it was quite important for me at the time because it might sound to some people like I slowly brainwashed you in a way. And I wouldn't completely blame them for thinking that for a second. But I wanted to emphasize, like, for me, it was very important that you went on your own journey of understanding. And yes, sure, I did put that video in front of you that was like kind of make it or break it. Like if you don't have any questions after seeing this, then maybe we do really believe in different things right now, and it's gonna be hard to like actually work that out in terms of our relationship and everything. What are we gonna do? But for me, it's important to say, like, I did put that in front of you, but for the rest, it's like I didn't try to push information on you or like to convince you of specific things. And you said sometimes, because you noticed me like maybe before this getting upset at things or listening to something while I was cooking, and I think you said actually like you got worried at one point that I was getting too like emotionally invested into all of this, which I disagreed with, but I was emotionally invested, but it's not like I was having reactions like, oh fuck, I'm so pissed. Like maybe it seemed that way, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But I just wanted to say, like, I tried my best to kind of give you agency to learn to find things out on your own, because again, I'm so convinced that there is a lot of questions to be asked, that if I was lying to you, if I was trying to mislead you, I would be much more worried about put sending you to the right websites, or like giving you this website where you can learn this. And I was very happy for you to go wherever you wanted and ask questions, which I think shows like my conviction about there is something wrong and it needs to be seen and talked about, and you will find it eventually. So
yeah. No, and I think that is important to point out because it is something I've thought about before. Not necessarily that you brainwashed me, but just, yeah, I guess the question of did I arrive to this on my own? And I don't think there's an issue in saying that, no, you guided me to at least that video, right?
yeah,
And I guess it's, oh, I hate to use the cheesy language. I guess it opened my eyes or awoke me to something.
unfortunately, you don't want to use
And
that term a lot, because it's not a question of, oh, I'm enlightened now, I see the truth, which a lot of people on our side put it that way. They're like, oh, I'm awake, I'm awake, I'm awake, and everyone else is asleep. And sometimes I do feel like calling someone a sheep, because I'm like, how can you act this way? But I really don't want to make it the focus, like we're some kind of enlightened people and everyone else is dumb. It's like, no, we're trying to, also I'm trying at least to educate others and help them see.
yeah, I think that's been a big part of it. I mean, as you say, and I think that's one thing I emphasized, not just in this, around this topic, but many things in general when we have these conversations and these arguments, or even if you're trying to teach me something, I'll be like, I need to work it out for myself and how it works for me. And I need to
Yeah.
see if my point of view, I need to find sources that speak to me or so and so on, you know what I mean? And I think I've been very conscious of, I guess, establishing my agency throughout this process, and also if I do talk to other people, making sure that they have full agency
Yeah,
in this
yeah, like when you
process.
talk to your friends, you've made such an effort, I think, to not, like when it comes to the famous word we're not allowed to say, and I don't want to say because the algorithm might pick it up. But you know what that's being rolled out worldwide right now. Like when you talk to your friends who, for the most part, believe in the sort of narrative that we're told by the media, like I've never heard you, and you've made really an effort to say, you've never said to anyone like, don't take it, don't take it. Like, but you have tried to at least share information that might make people think and at least reflect and honestly have informed consent, because it's a pretty important thing. And it's important, I think, for both of us, and I think it's a good thing, to be honest.
No, it's
So
been, yeah, like you say, something I've been very conscious of not advising people. Or one thing I hate the most is unsolicited advice. I friggin' hate
yeah,
when
you
people
hate it, yeah.
get things I haven't asked for. So I try to do the same and approach it through, um, I guess, yeah, approach it through interest and just trying to understand how other people feel about this. And, I don't want there to be siloed thinking. And I know, for example, one thing that really struck me in a conversation with a couple of friends is, I thought that this was like sort of early on after, I guess, my awakening or my transitioning and seeing things in a different way. But I was discussing it with a couple of friends over a video call or whatever, and I found myself like sort of in disbelief that they weren't buying what I was telling them, right? And they were coming back with, I guess, all of the things I was coming back to you at the beginning, you know what I mean? So when I was saying, oh, this seems a bit suspicious, or maybe there's this, or I don't trust these institutions, they would be like, yeah, but X, Y, and Z from the media,
Kind of
why
stock
would they?
answers that you could predict pretty easily.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I found myself getting really frustrated. Like, how can you not see this? Like, are you serious? And they kind of re-emphasized to me, like, we have had a totally different perspective. The perspective we've been living through this pandemic in has been so different from what you've been living in. And on top of that, they had been in a place where the lockdowns weren't as harsh, the measures being taken weren't as harsh, whereas we had been in like lockdown Britain for about a year by that point.
Yeah.
And I had to remind myself, I think that was the first kick up the butt I got, to remember that not everyone is going to see this the same way. Not everyone is going to see the same like information that you might have seen,
Hmm.
or b, interpret it in the same way that you might have interpreted it. um, they might not have the people to discuss it with and question the ideas that, and that's not, I worry I'm sounding a bit condescending
No,
or
but at the
something.
end, it's very complicated. Understanding really, and I'm not pretending that I understand everything. I'm like on this journey that I'm like incrementally adding like 1% of understanding, like every once in a while. But
Yeah,
it's really complicated, the whole picture. Like you can simplify it, but then that's when you get also into like this sort of maybe more conspiratorial thinking, because the more you simplify it, the more it seems like black and white, and it's like, oh, it's obvious that there's this group that wants power in this, but it's very complicated and it's very intertwined with human behavior and emotion and politics and economics and finance and everything.
there's
So,
a few people I follow on Twitter, and they've been using this term sense making a lot, particularly throughout this period. And I guess that's part of the journey that I found myself on, which is this notion of sense making, right? Because there's so much information, and you really have to be like, okay, literally, how do I make sense of this? How do I? So, for example, I've joined a lot of groups on Telegram, because it's a good way for me to find all of this information aggregated in one place, right? But I have to be super cautious as I'm going through it and be like, okay, no, this seems dodgy. Okay, no, I need to fact check this. Okay, no, this, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and
I
these
have
guys believe in lizard reptilians that are taking over the world, which who knows,
literally,
maybe that even that fucking turns out to be true in 3 years. But it's, you have to really be careful because the world is going crazy in many ways right now. So
you know, it is really interesting where it's like, okay, this is someone who is a bit racist, and I don't know if I want to align myself with their views, kind
yeah.
of thing. Or this is someone, yeah, who thinks there are lizard people and the world is flat. And it's quite interesting, I guess, being part of sort of conspiratorial thinking, or finding yourself in the midst of conspiratorial thinking, because that's, I guess, what we're in right now. If we're going against this COVID narrative, we would be
Yeah.
labeled conspiracy theorists, right? And it does really open your mind. For me, I'm like, I genuinely do not believe lizard people are not real, right? But with everything I've seen over the course of the last 2 years and all of the covering up and the sophistication of how information has been managed, I'm like, who knows? Maybe they
That's what
could
I
be.
said. That like don't want to speak too soon. Maybe in a few years we'll find out even that was true. But it's like you have to. The point here is you have to kind of be careful, like where you get your information, which I think for me has been a good thing in many ways because I
Yeah,
spent at least like a good percentage of my time like on social media. I also spend it like criticizing, like again, whatever this means, our own side. Like someone literally yesterday, I commented on someone that put like there was a thread about Klaus Schwab or the World Economic Forum, and someone put a family tree of Klaus Schwab being the son of like the Rothschilds through another marriage, literally like one of these family dynasties you see, and that there's little Klaus at the end with his evil like robe and son of Rothschild something. And it's not true. He wasn't the son of a Rothschild. He was the son of a Nazi collaborator, which is an interesting story. But, you know, and it had like 20 likes and like no comments, which on Twitter is a good indicator that people liked it and didn't really ask any questions about it, and they took it. So, you know, and I don't like to see that because that detracts, that gives ammo to the people that says, oh, we're just conspiracy theorists that want to sort of believe in nonsense. And it's like, no, this stuff is, as James Corbett say, people like to think that there's secret documents that only a few people, I mean, I'm sure there are, but to understand the world, like you don't need access to like secret documents. There's literally a lot of the stuff that's happening that we're being told pretty much where we're headed and what's happening and what the future is going to look like likely. So
yeah. I think that's one thing that is really fascinating as well, is there's times where like it, I'm trying to think of what, I mean, the big sort of famous one now is the you'll own nothing and be happy, World Economic Forum line, right? And there's times where it feels like like they, whoever they is, but they're telling us what exactly the plans are. And there's other times where I feel like, no, but maybe I'm just taking this too literally or misinterpreting what they're trying to tell us, or maybe it was just a badly copywritten catchphrase, you know what I mean? So
yeah, and
there's
some
a lot of
people, yeah, sorry.
there's a lot of sense making or sense to be made,
Yeah.
what's going on. And I think what's really sad is how lonely it feels in a way.
Yeah.
Because I mean, for us, we're really lucky we can talk to each other, but there's such a fear around bringing it up, um, in other circles. And
Yeah.
I think we have tried and been met with awkwardness or something. Other times, I think it's really interesting. I mean, surrounding the poke,
Yeah.
we've been with friends and the question has sort of come up, right? And I've been awkwardly silent because I'm just like, oh, deer in
Oh,
headlights.
it's
I
here.
don't
It's here. The question is here.
yeah, I don't want to say that I haven't had it, but I don't want to lie and say that I have,
Mm.
right? And I remember one time, I mean, a couple of times I've been met with like, oh yeah, no, don't worry, like I was weird about it as well, but I just had to get it and I got it over and done with, and I'm like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
thank goodness. um Other
Honestly,
times
I've been more pleasantly surprised in that regard. I don't think yet we've been met with like, oh my god, at least not in person with friends, which we don't have hundreds of friends also, so it's not like we
no, I
but
mean, yeah, I don't think, oh my god, I think there is the uncomfortable reaction though when you know that there's people who are pro poke,
yeah,
and they're kind of just like, you know what I mean, like, I'm not gonna go into it because I don't want to get political or whatever.
yeah.
So
But what sucks is the absence, aside from the thing that is not meant to be said, like what's really sad for me is the lack of, like, for example, with friends that I have, very intelligent guys, they work in like finance, and what I found sad for me is the lack of discussion, not about the jab or like all the, like about what's happening in the world. Like we live in such transformative times. Like it's so much stuff is happening from all sorts of perspective. Whether you're interested in finance, economics, society, like culture, like there's stuff happening fast. And for me, it's how this whole like there's a line, let's say, that we talked about, like how conspiratorial thinking, like once you cross this line, it's like it's almost like it creates an awkwardness around. And when you start considering ideas that are not, I guess, accepted in the narrative or in the media, the nexus that we live in now, it immediately like raises like attention. I can see it in my friends, literally. It's like they don't want to get into any sort of discussion surrounding what's happening in a way. And it's very sad because I think those discussions are so important. And if we don't have them as people, as individuals in society, I get the feeling that these things are just going to be decided for us because there's no real conversation happening about the future.
I
So
mean, it's an interesting point. I think we have to remember that both of us are quite into this kind of thing. We enjoy the process of discussing and sense making.
yeah, even
Um,
before the COVID, like when it comes to
yeah,
social issues like sex,
but it
gender,
must
all
have,
these things. Yeah.
there's just there I it must have been something I enjoyed doing, like working through and trying to find meaning in things. Um, and I guess one way you can approach it, which is a very simple way of approaching it, is if someone tried to talk to me about football. Sure, I know
Mm,
about football. I appreciate football being in the world and so on, but I wouldn't have the tools to talk about it. I wouldn't have the language or the knowledge to talk about it. And I would get bored and probably try to change the subject. Now, let's say COVID aside, right, or pandemic aside, I think it's the same with this kind of bigger world, big picture stuff. Some people are interested in talking about it and other people aren't. Some
yeah.
people are armed with the knowledge and the information to engage in a conversation with it. And some people are like, I'd rather talk about the new episode of whatever. And that's absolutely fine. I think
Yeah.
it's about sort of picking your battles and picking the moments where you'll have those conversations. And I don't think anyone should be forced to engage with it.
No, I
Although
guess
it's
that's true in a way. Yeah.
fair enough that there might be some disappointment maybe if people choose absolutely not to engage with it. And I
That
think,
definitely. Yeah.
and
That
it's,
definitely. Yeah.
I mean, this is again, like I said, not to make a simple comparison, this is bigger than football.
Mm,
I guess people could argue the World Cup affects everyone, but this really does affect everyone and
yeah.
how we're move through society. So I think maybe that's where more of the disappointment lies. Yeah, it's a very interesting sensation when trying to have these conversations and you're met with kind of rejection of even talking about the ideas or talking about the subject
Yeah.
because it's like, but this affects you. um
Yeah, but then again, the example you gave of it's not football, of course, but it did, it does help to see, like, maybe they do see it as like another class of discussion. They don't see it as like an overarching fuck. This is, as you said, this is going to affect people. They see it as another topic, which maybe
yeah.
they don't want to really get into. I guess what I was saying is that I found it slightly disappointing considering the friends in question are especially into finance and economics and the world, which I think is a huge part, as I've talked about in recent episodes of the podcast. It's a huge part, I think, of what's happening. So I guess that's more of where the disappointment was. But no, it's true as well. Like I understand that. And that's why I try not to force the conversation of people on people ultimately. And if I was someone else, another type that was maybe into these sorts of things, I would have rejected my friends already. I've seen all the time people on Twitter that basically, well, usually it's more the other way, people that are into the whole narrative rejecting them. But I've also seen people that are sort of awake, and according to what their own opinion, they're awake and they've rejected friends for being sheep or something. So ultimately, I think that's just not helpful. You might have disagreements at the end, bad disagreements that end up in arguments that you're like, okay, we're never going to get along in this regard, and we might as well never talk about it again. But yeah, I guess it's when it comes to family also, and close and people that are close to you. And yeah, with my family, that because a lot of my family is in the States right now, It's more like we have I mean, I've had the discussion with a few, like my aunt, and she's very understanding. She's at the jab, and she's pro jab and everything, but she's my mom's sister, so we always have this special sort of relationship where we're very open with each other and stuff. But the slightly more extended family in the States, like they know I haven't had the poke, and there I can definitely feel like a tension because we haven't spoken in a while, and it's just weird. It's just so weird what's out in many ways on so many levels.
I
How
mean, you have
families,
to
yeah,
remember that for a lot of, I mean, first of all, I find the messaging in America fascinating.
yeah, it's
And
crazy.
whether it's the messaging or it's the way people have received the messaging, because to be fair, I don't think I've seen as much of the messaging as much of, or I don't think I've seen so much messaging more than, how am I trying to say? More than people repeating or the effects of the messaging, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So, you know,
but even in the
and
UK, if you think about it, like it's not.
I don't know. I see. Maybe it's because of who I follow in the UK. Maybe it's because more of the commentators I follow on Twitter who are British are also on our side. I hate again that term, but are being more critical about the
Yeah,
pandemic. Whereas I don't know if I follow very many pandemic critical
yeah, and in
American.
America, it has really become politicized, where it's literally Democrat, Republican. So maybe that's also a factor that
Yeah,
makes it a bit
but
harder to follow.
I mean, what
Yeah.
I find fascinating though is that they are convinced that if you get COVID, you will die. Well,
No,
it
it's
seems
crazy.
for
The polls.
people, right? So I can see how that with that messaging and the messaging that if you are unpoped, you are a transmitter of COVID, a vector of disease. They put two and two together
Yeah.
and they're like, you are a murderer. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
basically. Yeah.
So I can see how the tension is that high. And for me, it makes me really sad. I think it's so abusive. I think
Mhm.
it's so manipulative. I think people are literally being mentally abused by the state and the media because they're
Yeah.
being put into a constant state of fear where they have to fear strangers. You know what I mean? And I think it's fascinating because we've never, I mean, we have, sure, but in our modern time, we've never behaved like this about uh, illness and spreading illness.
No, it's a change, a complete paradigm shift in how we view ourselves as bodies, as biological beings in a biological world. It's hence, biosecurity, which is not good. But yeah, I wanted to mention it's 10:02 now. I know we're on limited time. So how do you feel? Do you want to go on? Do you want
Uh,
to pick it up another time? Do you feel like coming back on the podcast maybe at some point?
I'd love to return as a guest. I mean, we could do another 10 minutes if you want and wrap it up.
Yeah. And what can we talk about as a last sort of topic? So big question, but if you can sum it up more or less, what do you think is actually happening in the world? With maybe taking COVID as a focus, unless that's too big of a question and you'd rather maybe do
My
something else.
best. I mean, it's an interesting thing because it is kind of it's a good thing to be armed with in a nutshell explanation for when you do engage in conversations like this with people who may be undecided or on the opposite side of opinion to you and they ask, so what's really going on,
Which
what's
you
the
might be
big,
faced with this question this weekend because
yeah,
Illy
we'll
is going
see.
to
I'm
Illy's
gonna
going to
go
see some friends for Halloween. So yeah.
so from what I understand, and again, like you say, it's a really broad and multifaceted issue, and it's important not to simplify it into depopulation or eugenics or whatever. I think COVID-19 pandemic is real. Excuse me. I think it may very well be the consequence of carelessness in a laboratory setting in China, right? I don't think it was intentionally released as any sort of murderous depopulation pathogen or whatever. I do think, though, that this period in this pandemic and this crisis has been taken advantage of and perhaps manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I understand, and I don't have a very strong financial background or understanding, but the financial system has been in crisis for a very long time. And for it to recover in a way that's beneficial to humanity would require a lot of very wealthy people to give up a lot of wealth and a lot of power. So in order to avoid that, there's an attempt to make a reset of the financial system, as well as the global political system. Now, we've been moving towards centralization for a very long time politically, as we've seen with, these sort of supranational bodies like the United Nations or
The WHO even with help, and
WHO,
the European
what's
Union. Like, I mean, a lot of not everywhere, but the trend pretty much, yeah, has been towards centralization of power, banking.
is increasingly happening. We're getting a huge centralization of power. And I think, yeah, we need that both politically and economically for that to work. And I think this provides an opportunity for political centralization. So, for example, everyone having this green pass or vaccine passport, this sort of digital identity, I think that's part of it. Financial centralization, more banks, central banks moving towards digital currency. I think that's part of it. Now, the whys, I mean, you could say that one of the whys is optimistically to make the world a better place.
It could be argued. It could be, yeah.
Yeah. I think more pessimistically, it is to retain power and to extend power, because when you are aware of what everyone is doing, what everyone is spending, where everyone is going, and then increasingly how everyone behaves, if we move more towards a social credit style system a la China, you can have complete control over what you want to do in society. And not only that, but as we discussed earlier on, you kind of cause society to control itself. You don't even need to do that much. Once society feels like there's a mechanism watching it or controlling it, you know what I mean? It will start to step into line and self-regulate.
And self-regulation becomes snitching, basically, in a way. Like
is one aspect of it. I think, yeah. I think a big part of it, though, is, how do I put it? The rules don't even have to be created or written down. If you think of like an Animal Farm-esque kind of thing where they put all the rules on the wall, and they slowly keep adding more rules the more broken society gets, and these rules start to accommodate for the brokenness,
the shift,
right?
Yeah.
And people can't question the morality or the unfairness. We all know there's bad laws, there are immoral laws, and that's an example of it. Now, I think what this generates is we don't even have to put these things into law, because society starts thinking it by themselves and they start regulating that morality within themselves, and it becomes unwritten and unspoken. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's not a simple, straightforward explanation, but I think there's lots of moving parts that is bringing us towards more totalitarianism. And a big part of that is centralization, social centralization, political centralization, and economic centralization. And they say never waste a good crisis. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that's a very good summary, especially because I don't think I told you I would ask you this. So it was a good little, I'm from an unprepared. I think it's good. It's a good way to put it, honestly. And it's important to emphasize how I think it's a point I wanted to raise, because you said something. What did I want to say? It's like you can tell people, especially on people on the left, liberals, and it's like they understand this. you tell them, do you think that capitalists, capital, whatever you want to call it, the powers that be, powerful people, elites, do you think they're taking advantage of this crisis, of the pandemic? And most of them will be like, yeah, for sure, people are taking advantage. But then they don't realize, what they miss is that they don't see how the powers that be taking advantage of the pandemic, of the situation, also feeds back and like prolongs the situation in a way. Because if this situation is benefiting a lot of people that are powerful and have the power to make decisions that impact society and other people, it's like they miss it. They're like, oh yeah, people are just skimming money, and they think that's where it ends. It's like, no, this is literally lasting. It's in place.
Infrastructure.
UK extended the emergency powers in a farce scene in Parliament a week or two ago. Italy is talking about extending them until March. So it's like they don't see like how this is just prolonging the crisis. And they just see it as, oh yeah, people are just making money. I'm sure people are making billions, and it's terrible. But there's a pandemic, so we have to kind of weather the storm, and so it's just frustrating. But yeah, I think sorry, it was a very good, I think, little summary. Of course, you can write 10 books, 1,000 pages long each, to talk about all of this, but it's important, I think, to break it down into sort of bite-sized chunks for people. Yeah, and yeah, ultimately,
I think it's the kind of thing you need to sort of pull apart each of the different, if you were to think of columns, political, economic, and social columns, and there's layers and there's foundations at each of them. And I guess what you have to ask is, with these three columns, what is the platform that they're holding up at the top?
And ultimately what matters, sorry, just to conclude, I think it's what matters ultimately, and what I'm trying to do with the podcast and writing, is to talk to normal people and help them understand more what the future might look like and what they can do to prepare and to be ready and to all of that. So it's important to understand that the information I'm trying to communicate is, it can be bite-sized for different people, because people are also busy. People don't have time to understand the whole socio-political system just to understand what's happening with COVID. You need to be able to give them a simplified version, while making sure that they don't run with it and just think that's the end of that whole picture. Because as I said, it can be immensely complicated. You can make it as complicated as you like once you get into like central banking, like finance, all of that. But ultimately we have to communicate to the average person that just doesn't have time, I think, to get into all of these different things. And even us who are really exposed to this information are trying our best to understand, and we still are confused about many things. And
we remember, we're both not that it makes a huge difference, but we're both university educated. We've both learned how to like read academic papers, or to read academically and pull out information, and I find it hard to do. Well, even though I've been doing it, I've done it for what, 5 years more. So I can understand how, as you say, bite-sized information is important. And it feels like we're getting so much bite-sized information from everywhere that it's hard to find a balance of like, okay, you get a news report that gives you this information or quotes a study or XYZ. How do you make that a little bit more tangible, or how do you back that up, or how is it for the average person to make sense of that? Which I'm not sure.
It's one of the questions I think we need to find ways to tackle, ultimately, from my perspective, especially because I'm the ones with the podcast and trying to communicate these ideas ultimately to people. And
I'm just a guest.
No, but anyway, I know you have to go, so I think I'll let you go, and hopefully we'll see you again. I'm sure people will enjoy this little change, and just not hearing my voice, but also having a bit of a discussion. But yeah, thank you for joining, and I'll see you in a few minutes, because I'm actually just in the other room in the same flat. So
work.
Have a good day at work, and I'll see you just now. Thanks everyone for listening, and I'll be back with another episode very soon. Cheers, guys.